help, but I think more the message is why you came. Certainly a message that we are so filled with joy and to share. And Tom Petriano, as you well know, is our wonderful presenter today. Dick Dina and Linda Leone will be respondents to his talk. Other people on the panel here have been planning these sessions, so they're here to provide any insights as well, but we hope to engage you in the conversation as well. And let's begin by welcoming Tom Petriano.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. On this rainy June day, it's always a pleasure to be here at Our Lady Queen of Martyrs. It's been a pleasure to be part of this ongoing series on the Year of Mercy. And I think what we are about to discuss today and in future gatherings is really might be the pinnacle of what this Year of Mercy has been all about in terms of the message of love and the joy of love that this document speaks of. The commentator on Vatican affairs, John Allen, writes a regular column about what's happening in Rome and in the Vatican, has called this document, The Joy of Love, that we are gathering to talk about today, a breakthrough of no small consequence. Another author, a fairly well-known biographer of Pope Francis, John Inveray, wrote the biography called The Reformer Pope, has called this document an epic bid to shape the Church's actions and attitudes for generations to come. So this is already recognized as an amazing text that we are beginning today to try and look more deeply into. If I could offer an opening image before trying to give you an overview of what this document is saying, and as Father John said in Mass, it's a fairly long document. It's 9 chapters, it's 325 paragraphs, but if I could capture it in an image, maybe an Instagram image, for example, the image that comes to my mind is St. Peter's Square in Rome. In the year 1656, Pope Alexander VII commissioned the noted Italian artist and sculptor Gian Lorenzo Bernini to design St. Peter's Square. And the result of that design and that effort was the magnificent colonnade that you see if you've seen pictures or been to St. Peter's in Rome. And Bernini talked about when he set out the task of designing the square, that it was his desire to create in stone an image of open and welcoming arms. That the square should be a place that demonstrates in stone, embracing and welcoming all who come. I think that image is one that represents everything that after I finished reading this document, really means to say to us. It's a long document, it's very readable, it's something that's addressed to all of us. If I could try and boil it down, summarize it, present it, represent it to you in a short period of time this afternoon, I would like to do so by identifying 6 themes. 6 themes corresponding to 6 words that strike me as being what make this such a marvelous statement, which make it what some have called a breakthrough or an epic document. So the first word that comes to my mind when I read this document is the word dialogue. It's important to note that the title, The Joy of Love, has a subtitle. It's subtitled A Post-Synodal Apostolic Exhortation. It's an important point not to be missed in that subtitle. That this document is not something that emerged out of thin air, is not something that Pope Francis just sat down one day with pen to paper and offers to us, but it is the result of an ongoing and fairly extensive process of dialogue that began 2 years ago with the first Synod on the Family in the year 2014, where Pope Francis invited to Rome bishops from all over the world, married couples, advisors to the bishops, to gather to discuss issues of of concern and importance that families throughout the world are facing. And then they resumed the following year in 2015 as a follow-up to that first meeting. And what we have in this document now is the result of that rather extensive process of dialogue, of openness to the many different points of view that those bishops who came to Rome had about family life, about what were the issues in family life, about the struggles that people were facing and how to deal with them. It's the result of a process of dialogue. When Pope Francis addressed the bishops at the First Synod in 2014, he used a very interesting term in talking to them. It's actually a Greek word that has found its way into the English language. It's actually in the dictionary. It's called parousia. For the teacher in me, if there was a blackboard here, would write on the board, Parrrhesia, parousia, which is a Greek word that has become a literary form that means open, honest, or frank conversation, free talking. And I just would like to share with you a little bit of what he said back in 2014 at the beginning of the process that gave us this document. He said to the bishops gathered there, "One general and basic condition is this: speaking honestly. Let no one say, 'I cannot say this. They will think this or that of me.' It is necessary to say with parousia," there's that word. "It is necessary to say with parousia all that one feels." After the last consistory in which the family was discussed, a cardinal wrote to me saying, "What a shame that several cardinals did not have the courage to say certain things out of respect for the Pope, perhaps believing that the Pope might think something else. This is not good. This is not synodality, because it is necessary to say all that in the Lord one feels." And he goes on to exhort and encourage them to speak what's on their minds and in their hearts. That openness to dialogue is anytime you open yourself to asking people, "Please tell me honestly what's on your mind and in your heart," you are opening yourself to a variety of points of view and feelings, and certainly those were expressed. And therefore this document, the challenge of writing this document was to try and somehow incorporate what at times were very diverse points of view about issues concerning family life, love and marriage and divorce and remarriage. But dialogue, Pope Francis, I think, realized was absolutely essential. So this is first, I think, and foremost, an example of dialogue, an example of what the church itself should be, an example of what Pope Francis says in paragraph 136 should take place in family life all the time. Openness to every member saying what's on their mind and in their heart. That's how dialogue takes place. Everyone, he says in that section, talking about the family, everyone has something to contribute, from the oldest to the youngest. You're probably the youngest one here, right? How old are you? 12. I won't ask who the oldest one is, but from the oldest to the youngest, everyone has something to contribute. Along those same lines of dialogue, of the openness of everyone that they have something to contribute, one of the things I found striking about this, and I say this as someone who makes his living as a teacher, one of the amazing things is when you look in the footnotes, you see the variety of sources that Pope Francis draws from and quotes, including, in a way that I have never seen in any other papal documents, a number of Latin American poets. He quotes people like Jorge Borges, an Argentinian poet who was a friend of his, Octavio Paz, another American poet named Mario Benedetti. He has an extended and beautiful quote from Martin Luther King. I've never seen this in a papal document before. And I take on the word of those who have researched this. This is the first papal document that has ever referenced a movie. And the movie, I'll say more about later, is Babette's Feast. So again, that idea of open dialogue, willingness to hear the voices of others. Now, I think this is significant not only for understanding how this document evolved, because it is an honest, best attempt to incorporate different voices that were sometimes dissonant and disagreeing, into a single document. It's representative not only just of what Pope Francis is thinking. I suspect if he wrote everything just that he was thinking and believed, it might be a little different. But he did his best to incorporate all the different voices. And I would say that that is very important for ecclesiology. Ecclesiology, what it means to be church, what it means to do church. It means to be as inclusive as the columns in Bernini's St. Peter's Square represent, to include and represent other voices. More so than most other papal documents, this document quotes from other bishops' conferences, that local churches have an important voice in the process of coming to a statement about the nature of love and family life. So dialogue that includes openness, I think, is an extremely important theme that is represented in the joy of love. The second theme that I think is extraordinarily important in this document, I would represent by the word gradualness. Gradualness. In paragraph 295, Pope Francis actually quotes St. Pope John Paul II, and an encyclical of his called on the nature of the family, Familiaris Consortio, and this is what John Paul II says: "The law of gradualness in the knowledge that the human being knows, loves, and accomplishes moral growth by different stages of growth." We accomplish, I think the word is moral good. Moral good is accomplished in stages of growth. I think that's a terribly important notion to be reminded of. And Pope Francis is reminding us that Pope John Paul II has told us this, which is a theme that has been consistent in the Church's moral theology, that nobody is in the same place. We're all at different points in the journey. We're all making our best effort, but we're not all in the same place. And God's grace unfolds gradually in all of our lives, not instantaneously. It's unrealistic for anyone to expect any one of us to be at some place right now. We're all on the way. We're all along the journey. I think that, especially in the context of the Year of Mercy, this is such an important point to be cognizant of. That we're not all in the same place, and it's unfair and unrealistic and judgmental to expect everyone to be in the same place. Gradualness. Okay? The document makes several references in the story, and in its pages, it makes several references actually illustrating this theme of gradualness to the story in John's Gospel of Jesus and the Samaritan woman. You know that story where Jesus goes to the well and meets the woman there, the disciples are off somewhere else, and he engages in this conversation, this dialogue, if you will, with her, beginning with a simple question, I'd like some water to drink. And from that simple question, takes her from one question to another question. Why are you here? Are you married? She tells him, I'm married, but he invites her to recognize she's been married several times. And there's a gradual process unfolding in that conversation. And what I think the reason that is a story from the Gospels that Pope Francis puts front and center in this document is because not only is this how Jesus treated others, but it's the way we must treat each other. We're all on the way, and we're all at different points in the journey, and we need to accept that. And along those same lines, there's a phrase. Pope Francis is becoming famous for certain phrases. Sometimes they're called Bergoglioisms, phrases that he uses over and over again. And one of the phrases that occurs in this document that also he has used in the previous document, The Joy of the Gospel, it's also in Laudate Si, and it's also in the first document he wrote, which was really begun by Pope Benedict, Lumen Fidei. The same phrase comes up over and over again. You ready for this? Okay, this is the one. Time is greater than space. Time is greater than space. It's a really interesting phrase, and he uses it all the time. I mean, it's used in all these documents, and it's sort of like one of his pet phrases. So what does he mean, time is greater than space? Well, he actually says something about it in this document, in the very beginning, I think the third paragraph. I would make it clear that not all discussions of doctrinal, moral, and pastoral issues need to be settled by interventions of the magisterium. In other words, the teaching of the church is not what's called upon to intervene to resolve every moral, pastoral, or doctrinal issue. Unity of teaching and practice is certainly necessary in the church, but this does not preclude various ways of interpreting some aspects of that teaching or drawing certain consequences from it. This will always be the case as the Spirit guides us towards the entire truth until He leads us fully into the mystery of Christ. So, time is greater than space. We are engaged in this unfolding process, and in time, truth becomes more and more clear, and it is not resolved by a single intervention in space, so to speak, but in time. Okay, time. So far we've talked about dialogue and gradualness. I don't know how it's coming across to you, but I find that an incredibly consoling notion for me personally, gradualness. I'm not all that I can be or am expected to be. I am a work in progress. It used to be a poster, be patient, God isn't finished with me yet. Right? That's gradualness, and it's pretty cool. I don't know. I just find that to be part of the hopefulness of this document. And God knows that, The third theme that I glean from this document that I would put forward to you today that is of paramount importance is suggested by the word discernment. Discernment comes up over and over again in the document, and it's a word that reflects certainly Pope Francis's background as a Jesuit, where in the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola, discernment during the 30-day Ignatian retreat is such a key element. Discerning where I am in my relationship to God, how I am in my relationship to God, where is God calling me? Let me share with you a couple of lines from paragraph 37 about discernment. We have long thought that simply by stressing doctrinal, bioethical, and moral issues, without encouraging openness to grace, we were providing sufficient support to families, strengthening the marriage bond, and giving meaning to marital life. We find it difficult to present marriage more as a dynamic path to personal development. Notice again that word dynamic, process, gradualness. None of us are complete. And so too marriage is in that dynamic process toward personal development and fulfillment. We also, now here, get this, we also find it hard to make room for the consciences of the faithful, who very often respond as best they can to the gospel amid their limitations and are capable of carrying out their own discernment in complex situations. And here's what some commentators have called the money sentence of the whole document. Okay, ready for the money sentence of the whole document? We have been called to form consciences, not to replace them. Okay, so that the discernment, which is rooted in the church's teaching on conscience, okay, is not about replacing consciences, but helping all of us who are on the way to form our consciences through discernment. And I know, and I'm glad that today is not the end of this discussion. There are opportunities, there will be opportunities for extended discussion about how do we apply this idea of discernment and conscience in our own lives. This is not something new. This has been a long-standing teaching in the Church. In fact, in The Joy of Love, Pope Francis quotes from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, where conscience is of prime importance in the development of the moral dimensions of our lives and in growth in virtue. We do it through conscience, and conscience is something that's formed, and again, we're all in stages of developing our conscience. I might add that this is one of the things that makes some people nervous about this document. Okay? Because for some people who have read this document, they'll say, well, it's not clear enough. You know, you're not making things black and white and right and wrong. It's too ambiguous. Well, the document is reminding us that discernment is not something that's universal, and there is no cookie-cutter form that all of us can fit into when making decisions about love and family life and the demands of family life and the choices we have to make. Discernment is central. In fact, the word conscience I read is used, I haven't counted them, but I trust whoever did, 30 times in the document. Okay? That this conscience, which is involved in the process of discernment, where am I now? How is God calling me? What is the best I can do in this situation? That this is of paramount importance. Now that does not negate, and he goes into this quite extensively, that does not negate objective morality. You know, this is a big debate. You know, if you say conscience, you're making everything subjective. You're saying everybody does what they think is best for them, and then you don't have objective morality. He's saying, no, there is an objective morality, of course, but there is the subjective application of that objective morality that each of us does in the sacredness of our hearts, in dialogue with the church, with the ministers in the church, with a priest in confession, that the discernment takes place. It's part of mature adult Christian living. Discernment. Let me just share with you the quote he gives from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which says, I think this is important because I think for critics of this document, it's not something radically new or different. The Catechism itself says, imputability, in other words, guilt, imputability and responsibility for an action can be diminished or even nullified by ignorance, inadvertence, duress, fear, habit, inordinate attachments, and other psychological factors. In other words, what you might call mitigating circumstances. And in the process of discernment, with that we work through what our circumstances are. And what I can do in my situation may not be what you can do in your situation. And what you can do is not what I can do here and now, because of all those other factors. See, if it sounds to you like it's complex, and you say, gee, I just want it to be simple, the answer is it ain't simple. You know, it is complex, because adult living is complex, as we have to make serious and important decisions. That's 3. I'm going to say 6. I'm halfway through it. Okay, ready to hang in there? Okay. Fourth theme that I think needs to be addressed that comes from the title of this document is joy. How can we talk about this document without talking about joy? The joy of love. It's not an accident that this document was preceded by an earlier document called The Joy of the Gospel. Just a couple of days ago, when Pope Francis was saying Mass in Rome, his daily Mass, he talked about joy as being the identity card of the Christian. Okay? This is a big theme for him, joy. But what I find interesting, you know, these documents, before they're translated into other languages, are the first text is in Latin. And the document called The Joy of the Gospel, the title was Gaudium Evangelii. Gaudium was the word for joy, joy of the gospel. The title of this document in Latin is Amoris Laetitia. Laetitia is another word for love. Is another word for joy in Latin, Gaudium and Laetitia. Most of us would remember, except my friend over here, what's your name? Tommy, that's a great name, Tommy. Most of us would remember, but Tommy wouldn't remember this, but most everybody else would remember that during Advent, the third Sunday of Advent was always called what? Gaudete Sunday. And the fourth Sunday of Lent was always called Laetare Sunday. Two Latin words, both having the connotation of joy. Is it just accidental? No, there's a subtle difference between the two words. Gaudium has to do more with inner joy. Okay, inner joy. Laetitia, it has to do more with an outward manifestation of joy, exuberance, gladness. Okay, they're not mutually exclusive, but there's a nuance of difference in each of those two words, and therefore it's significant that this document uses the word laetitia, exuberance, the exuberance of love. I like that, right? The exuberance of what takes place in from the very beginnings when it starts, all through the process and journey and all the ups and downs of love between two people. Exuberance. Okay? One of the fascinating things about this document, as I said earlier, is it's the first papal document that references a movie. And in fact, as Pope Francis has mentioned in previous interviews, his favorite movie. He was asked by a journalist, do you have any favorite movies? He said, yes, my favorite movie. I have a favorite movie. As he has favorite novels and favorite poems and favorite pieces of music, you know, his favorite movie is a movie called Babette's Feast. How many of you have seen Babette's Feast? Okay, great movie maybe to show here. Okay, great movie, and it's Pope Francis' favorite movie. What better to do, Father John, maybe sometime this year to have a night when we show Babette's Feast. It's about this Lutheran community in Denmark. They're deeply faithful, but utterly joyless. Right? You've seen, they have no joy. Okay, and their lives become transformed by a young woman, Babette, who cooks this sumptuous meal for them, and gradually manages to help break through their joylessness. Okay? And one scene, there's a scene that he references in this document, is where Babette embraces one of the women of the town. Again, that idea of embrace, Bernini's colonnade, welcoming, and he embraces it. And somehow she has managed to bring joy to this joyless Christian community. Because it's Pope Francis' firm belief that joylessness does not go with faith. You can't be a person of Christian faith and be joyless. And therefore you can see why this is his favorite movie and why he quotes it in this document called The Joy of Love. Fifth theme that I would like to isolate from this document is fruitfulness. It's a word that's used in the document. We think generally of fruitfulness in marriage as bearing children. And of course, that's a prime way in which marriages are fruitful, by bearing children. But there are beautiful sections in here where he talks about where sometimes couples cannot have children. And he has a beautiful section, for example, on adoption. But then he goes on to say that fruitfulness extends beyond just having children. That the fruitfulness of love that first brings two people together must manifest itself in an increasingly larger rings of influence. That fruitfulness goes out beyond just the family to the community, to the country, to the world. And this is where Pope Francis gets into themes that are dear to his heart. You know, the poor, the marginalized, those on the peripheries. That the fruitfulness of married love has to extend even toward them, to be like Bernini's colonnade, all inclusive. So if I may, paragraph 181, where he says, we do well to remember that procreation and adoption are not the only ways of experiencing the fruitfulness of love. Even large families are called to make their mark on society, finding other expressions of fruitfulness that in some way prolong the love that sustains them. And here he quotes this beautiful 2 verses from a Latin American poet, Mario Benedetti. The poem in Spanish is Te quiero, I love you. And this is the English translation. Your hands are my caress, the harmony that fills my days. I love you because, get this, I love you because your hands work for justice. If I love you, it is because you are my love, my companion and my all. And on the street, side by side, we are much more than just two. Okay? But I love that line, I love you because your hands work for justice. Then Francis says, no family can be fruitful if it sees itself as overly different or set apart. 6th and final theme that I would put forward today for all of us to think about. Compassion. Finally, the joy of love is a document about compassion. Empathy, if you will, understanding. And Francis uses this really interesting phrase. He talks, particularly in chapter 8, about those in irregular situations. Okay? And I find this section totally fascinating. He's talking about certainly those who are divorced, but I think it would be interesting for us to have a conversation about this on the panel. I think irregular situations can mean a lot of things, okay, besides just those who are divorced and feel separated from the church. Those who are living together, he talks about them. And what I find really interesting here is conspicuously absent is the phrase that most of us, except fortunately for Tommy, would not have heard this phrase, living in sin. That is not the phrase, how many of you, we've all heard that phrase, right? Living in sin. Conspicuously absent is that phrase, because there's a reason for that. Because it goes back to who am I to judge, right? It goes back to we're all gradually kind of responding to God's call in different ways, on different schedules. We're not all on the same schedule, we're all on different paths. And so there is this tremendous sense of compassion for those in those situations, to feel welcome, to seek ways to receive the sacraments. There's this wonderful section on what's called the internal forum, which is something that has always been a part of the Church's teaching, where in consultation with a confessor, one can and should make mature, prudent decisions based on their circumstances. It's just filled with compassion for those who are struggling in different ways, not with judgment, okay? But taking people where they are and inviting them further, lovingly and gently. Paragraph 321, that this idea of compassion is not just meant to be the attitude of the Church toward all its members, but in families themselves. Family life must be characterized by compassion. So he writes, Christian couples are for each other, for their children, and for their relatives, cooperators of grace and witnesses to the faith. God calls them to bestow life and to care for life. For this reason, I just love this. For this reason, the family has always been the nearest hospital. Don't you just love that? The family is the nearest hospital. The family is, or should be, the place where always we can go when we are in need. And of course, he's not just talking about physical infirmity here, right? The family are those who are always there for us to bind our wounds. The family is the nearest hospital. Part of the joy of love then is that compassion that is ever extending into ever widening circles. So let me then just end with a quote, not from this document, but from the previous document, The Joy of the Gospel, which talks about open arms, because I think this is what Francis, more than anything else, wants us to be as a church. So this is from the Joy of the Gospel, but it captures the message of this document. A church which goes forth is a church whose doors are open. Doors are open. Again, Bernini's colonnade, again, the year of mercy, open doors, right? That's the whole symbolism of opening the door. Don't we have doors in this diocese, in the seminary maybe, and somewhere else, I think? The open door is such a powerful symbol of what the church should be. Going out to others in order to reach the fringes of humanity does not mean rushing out aimlessly into the world. Often it is better to slow down, to put aside our eagerness in order to see and listen to others. To see and listen to others. To stop rushing from one thing to another and to remain with someone who has faltered along the way. At times we have to be like the father of the prodigal son, who always keeps his door open so that when the son returns, he can readily pass through. The church is not a toll house, it is the house of the Father, where there is a place for everyone with all their problems. Open doors, open arms, open heart, the Bernini colonnade, the joy of love. Okay, thank you all very much.
We'll have more on this panel that's up here in a few minutes, but let me introduce, so we can keep right on the topic, Linda Leone, who is the Director of Parish Social Ministry in St. Anne's Parish in Garden City. Linda really worked with the panel and a number of other people in planning this day. Having read the document extensively, she had some very significant areas that she wanted to emphasize and really taught us. So with no further delay, let's listen to Linda tell us about her particular response to this great document. We're just waiting for Bromley to get his place here. And after Linda, Dick Dina will also respond, we'll let Dick speak for himself.
Thank you, Father John. I just want to say, by echoing something I'm sure you all feel, isn't this Pope amazing? Isn't Pope Francis just an amazing and wonderful gift to our church? I just want to start by declaring that that's how I truly feel. And I think that from the very beginning, he has been amazing in how active he is. I mean, who of us hasn't seen so many clips or on Instagram or videos of where he goes and what he does and how he welcomes those who are most vulnerable. And he's a living example of mercy. And the fact that he called us to a year of mercy with an opportunity to reflect on what it means in our lives, I think is another gift to us. But because he's so active, and I know he maintains a schedule that I know I could never keep up at a fraction of the pace, but then again, I couldn't keep up with Father John, and many of you know him probably understand that. What I also think is a gift to us is that despite him living the message of mercy for us, he does recognize his role as part of the teaching authority of the church at the head of the magisterium to give us documents that are actually meant for us to follow. Now, many times documents might have been written for us in the past with rules. We can think of them as rules that are black and white, with exactly what we are supposed to know, whether or not it was our old Baltimore Catechism or ways in which we were meant to live. But what I think Pope Francis does for us is he gives us guidelines. And he tells us he doesn't change church teachings for us, but he's giving us guidelines for what to do. And when I read The Joy of Love, I would say that I found it to be full of two types of suggestions for us. There were pastoral suggestions, and then there were practical suggestions. I know, and I said this at our committee meetings, that for many of us, we might have just jumped to read this book and opened to chapters that we felt were most relevant in our lives. I know many Catholics wanted to hear what the Pope had to say about conscience formation, what the Pope had to say about Catholics who may be divorced and civilly remarried. But there's a wealth of insight in this document that covers those topics most specifically, but also so many others. So in terms of pastoral suggestions that he gives us, I thought it was interesting that he was offering advice to pastors as well as to lay people about the importance of praying together, about recognizing the value of developing loving relationships in our lives, but yet at the same time to develop morals and consciences. He talked about understanding the value and the importance of being part of the faith community. I think you all see that right here in Our Lady Queen of Martyrs. There is such a great value to being able to not just read this document as an isolated person, but to come together and share what it can mean in a faith community where people care for one another. I was big on reading this document and writing out quotes of what the Pope said himself, and I think in one of his final paragraphs in section 308, he exhorted us all to accompany with mercy and patience all those who are in the process of growing personally and in faith. So call to accompany one another wherever each of us finds ourselves. But then there's a whole practical list of things that you'll find in almost every chapter of this exhortation. He calls us to learn how to negotiate. He gives us actual practical suggestions on that. I mean, who in our lives has not had to learn how to negotiate? Or maybe say that we'd be more effective in everything we do if we did understand great principles of negotiation. He repeated a phrase that he had said earlier in one of his interviews, and also he had said it at a World Meeting of Families, that the three most important phrases that we should say in our families are, please, thank you, and I'm sorry. How basic and how practical, how often we might forget that. He speaks to us directly on how to communicate more effectively and try to understand others. And he puts this sentence in there, which I think jumped out at me, especially in our world today. Our loved ones merit our complete attention and our tenderness. How many of us give our complete attention to anyone at this time in our lives when we might have multiple feeds of information all the time and might constantly be distracted? But our loved ones merit our complete attention and our tenderness. So of course there is the whole care for those most wounded and in need, for those who have been abused, for migrants, for refugees, for families who have persons with special needs. That's a ministry very near and dear to my heart. I was so glad that he actually put that in this document as well. He names all of those most vulnerable and calls us to be there for them. But then he went on to give us other, what I call pearls in this document that I think we're meant to reflect on. He teaches us that we need to communicate more effectively, and then he tells us this line: communication is an art learned in moments of peace in order to be practiced in times of difficulty. He says to know how to forgive and to feel forgiven is a basic experience in family life. And yet, many people leave childhood without ever having felt unconditional love or understanding how to forgive or be forgiven. It's a real weight of responsibility for those of us who have had the benefit of knowing that we were loved, to remember that there are so many that haven't known that love and to be able to be examples of that in our own lives. He gave another description of the family, besides mentioning the nearest hospital, as you said, Tom. He said the family is the image of God, who is a communion of persons. I don't know if we think of our families as a communion of persons. I know, Father John, you were always reminding us to remember that even sitting down to a dinner table together is something that should cause us to think of Eucharist as bread that is blessed and broken and shared. But the family is the image of God, who is a communion of persons. We all love, I think anyone who read this document loved the fact that he took a whole exegesis on the first letter of the Corinthians. Love is perfect, love is kind, love is patient, love is kind. What does that mean in our lives? All so much and so important. And then another section that I won't go into here, but it's so important, I think, is on educating children in faith. I mean, I hope that we end up using this document in many ways, not only as parents, but in catechetical programs, for understanding that not only, as he says, parents always influence the moral development of their children, for better and for worse. but where are parents' responsibilities and our faith community's responsibilities for educating children in faith, and how important that is. So, as we move forward here in our panel discussion, I just want to say that my own enthusiasm for this document is just, it continues to grow, especially given what Tom just said in terms of the 6 frameworks. Thank you.
My name is Dick Dina. Actually, Richard Dina. I've been trying to change my name back to Richard for years. And then I find myself introducing myself as Dick. So, my wife Pat and I, who's right over here, we've been married for 40 years. We'll be 40 years next February. We've had a wonderful life, and have been blessed in so many ways. One of which was that a month ago, our son was married out in Los Angeles. My son is gay, and he married another man. A challenge for society, a challenge for the church. If I understand this document, my son is as important to God and is accepted by God as anyone else. That's something that my wife and I, in our family, knew years ago as we watched him grow up and go through his pain of being able to be himself in a hostile world. Certainly at that time. Thank God, not so much now. That he is loved and accepted by God for who he is an important concept that we as the church need to really accept and not play games with. And I find this document to be a very challenging document. It really is giving us a whole other sense of what the church is. What is its purpose? What is it here for? It gives us a whole other sense of who God is. God is mercy. The doctrine of the church is that God is mercy. We don't think of that so often, do we? We don't think of that as doctrine. Doctrine is the Trinity. Doctrine is transubstantiation. Doctrine is resurrection. Doctrine is who is God to us in our life. Remember the Baltimore Catechism, who is God? God is love. Where is God? God is everywhere. If we really take that, it gives us a different sense of who is God. God is not up in the sky, some old guy with a long beard. God is here. God is in us. We are in God. We are in each other. All matter is connected and is moving in a direction. There will be a culmination at some point, at some time. And together as one family, we will be there with Christ. I think that's an amazing vision of not only who is God, but what the church's role is. And the role of the church is the role of us, because this document is calling us, and the Pope says it very clearly, to have an adult spirituality. When you were children, you thought like children. You believed like children. Not God in the sky and all those things that were youthful ways of thinking about deep thoughts. But now we're challenged in this to have an adult spirituality, to accompany each other in life, to be accepting and understanding. That doesn't mean, as Tom said so well, that we put away any sense of what is truth. Truth is not just what I think. Truth is truth, and we are gradually moving into understanding truth and becoming a part of it. But I think that the great challenge here is to really open up to that concept, that faith in God and that faith in the role of the church, so that each of us, whether we're divorced, whether we're gay or straight, feels that we are together. And the Pope is very big on integrating He talks about the need, the role of the church is to integrate all people, regardless of your state in life. Whether you've been married 4 or 5 times, you have a role in the church, because God is mercy and God is love. So it really calls for a reform of the church, and we are the church. It calls for reform in our hearts, in our minds, and to be adults as we go forth with one another in this very complex world. Thank you.
I think Dick's, thank you, Dick, for that wonderful, and also Linda. I think Tom's comment before about dialogue, that the church has to open to hearing different views, hearing different points of looking at things. We want to welcome, you're very important to us. This committee has gotten together and values your input and your words, and where do we go next? Do you have any comments, questions, reflections, or reactions to what they've heard? Would anyone like to share them?
I do.
Yes.
I have a lot of children and young adult children, and I think one of the ways that I've been able to help them with their faith is through Pope Francis, and through, I think what he's saying is very appealing to a younger generation right now. And I think that's why I came, so I could learn more about this, so I could share more with them. But I think this whole idea of joy is what attracts people. And I think, I don't know, just to me, right, Sheila, it just makes so much sense. I mean, of course, we have issues when my kids are bringing friends into our home who are living together, and I have to say to them, guys, in my house, you know, if you're not married, you're not going to be, you know, so there are challenges, but if it's balanced with a lot of love and affection for anybody who comes around, and it's just reassuring that there's a God connection. So thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Anybody want to comment on that from here? This is a silent group over here. I promised them that they don't have to talk, but they've given a lot of input up till preparing this meeting. Anybody else like to respond over here? Any? Yes. Eileen, do you want to come up? You have a microphone.
One of the things that particularly grabs me is what Tom and Linda and Dick have spoken about, and that's the formation of conscience. And I think that is just so primary to us as adult Christians. And there's something in the back of my mind that I fall back on for myself. And it's not going to sound something that most people read, but Karl Rahner has a series of theological investigations. And in the 3rd volume, he has an essay on reflections on the experience of grace. And for him, grace means God with us. And what he says is, and he goes on to say, you know, it's not this, it's not that, and he goes on forever. But then he says what it is. And one of the things he says is that, have you ever had to make a decision in your life which no one else could make, and no one else could even, you know, comment on? Have you ever done it and know that this decision is for all eternity? And he says, that's what grace is like. That's what God with us is like in this formation. And it's not, you know, what am I going to do tomorrow, or am I going to go to Mass or not go to Mass or whatever, but it's that primary way in which we are human beings. And I just find Pope Francis just so reinforces that idea and that challenge to be able to live in that way.
Any other comments? Yes, Brother Lewis.
I think the point that hit me the strongest was that gradualness. And it hit me because this morning I had a conversation with a gentleman whose young son is problematic and suffering from most of the things that young people suffer today. And he said to me, well, do you think he'll ever espouse the church? And knowing that this, thank you. And knowing that this gentleman does physical labor and knows his way around architecture, etc., I said to him, just remember, you have to paint the floor before you move in the furniture. And sometimes, and he said, you know, it's a good way of putting it. And sometimes we forget that, and we end up moving the furniture in, and then say, oh, I have to move it back out again so I can paint the floor. Okay, so that's the point. And that gradualness kind of affected me that way. It triggered that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Lewis. Any other comments? Yes.
I have questions. I haven't read, admit I haven't read the book yet. I certainly intend to. But when they talk about inclusiveness and bringing everybody into the church, and mentioning different situations, whether it's divorce or gay or using contraceptives or whatever, how far into the church is this inclusiveness? I mean, I know what we said before about it depends on everybody's situation is different, and decisions are made according to some situations or mitigating factors. But is the Pope, do you think, moving toward allowing people to come in and fully celebrate the Mass in these circumstances?
I think
Go ahead.
Well, I think certainly coming into the church, the doors are always open to everyone. So in that sense, everyone is always welcome to come through the doors. But I think you were getting at the more critical question about the sacraments and receiving the sacraments. And I don't think there's a very clear-cut statement that this type of person can receive the sacraments and this person can't. It's clearly what makes someone, that there are the expectations of the church, but it seems to me the teaching on conscience suggests that persons are perhaps can make such a decision. I mean, that's certainly what I get out of it, because it's not clear cut, but I don't know what the others on the panel think, but certainly what I get out of it is that there is the capacity for certain individuals, and he doesn't mention. You mentioned he doesn't say, well, if you're practicing birth control, you can, or if you're practicing homosexuality, he doesn't mention those specifics, but he does talk about how conscience can enable sometimes people to make decisions for the sacraments. But you see, that's a private sort of decision, and therefore it would never be something that would be, anyone who is practicing birth control or doing this or doing that can receive communion. It's always going to be on that sort of internal forum. That's my take on it, but I don't know what you would like to say. Yeah.
I just briefly, and again, connecting it with what Tom just said, want to address this because I think that's the challenge that we all have, that we are not receiving a black and white document, and that discernment is gradual, and the document states that discernment will never come to complete fruition in this world, only when we are united with God. So our challenge is a lifetime challenge. And the Pope clearly states that the role of the church is not to replace our consciousness, it is to guide it and to offer us the resources to look within to explore our connection with God, and then to make the decision that we feel as best as we can. And what we feel today is the best that we can may not be what we will feel in the future. That's the gradualness as well. So it is not clear cut, and that's why it is an immense challenge, and dialogue will always have to be part of the church.
All things have a lifetime, and we don't want to spend a lifetime to keep you here. Bill had one comment?
Yeah, just have a quick one. I've noticed that Pope Francis hugs lots of people. You may have heard me say that I think the most radical thing that he's done, the most important thing that he's done, is to change the view of the church from this to this. Now that's a gradual process, but the fact that he started that and embodies it in everything that he does and everything that he says is enormously important. So are all the laws going to change, all the rules going to change in a way that we might like? Well, that's not the key thing. The key thing is he's saying, not this, but this. Now I think we've grown up in a church that often says this. You're wrong, you're a sinner. But if you follow the Gospels every week, you find out that that's not what Jesus did. This week's Gospel, next week's Gospel, people who are supposedly sinners get forgiven very easily and embraced because of compassion, because of love. That's who Jesus was. That's who we're supposed to be. And that's who the Pope is moving us toward.
Let me just conclude by just saying a little bit about our process. These people here are a number of people who've helped plan these sessions. This is going to continue ongoing sessions. This is not the last one, as Tom referred to. This is one of many. And we've welcomed other people from you to give us insight as to what's next. What do you need? What do you want to hear? What haven't we said? What are we leaving out? Tom most especially pointed out to Francis's desire, and ours as well, to be open about this and to have the conversation and maybe to have a little tension, which isn't a bad thing, because tension means growth. We are not here to all think one way. Different people here have different perspectives. We value the perspectives, and we all keep saying we value most your perspective. And so we want your input. I almost wish we could take all your names and let you know when the next meetings are and the next events, because it's a gradual and evolving program as well, open to the changes that are coming from hearing from you. So we want to hear more from you. I want to mention a couple of things of what our plans are. On June 20th, Father Himes will be here for a week. We almost have certainly firmed up for that date of the 20th of June through the week. He absolutely has fallen in love with this document as well. And Michael said it's one of the most profound things I've ever read, and I'm anxious to tell people of my perspective. So Father Michael Himes, who many of you know, will be here. We hope, Michael at the last minute has his calendar. But we didn't want to announce him coming today because we want to be sure that we got as many people here today to hear him. But Tom, during the summer, has given wonderful presentations. We certainly are welcoming him back this year and want to develop a format that is most responsible to the most number of people to hear the message. I know in the past he's spoken during the morning sessions, but we've gotten a lot of feedback from people saying, I'd love to hear him, but I work. And we might have to address that as a time for him to speak. And so that would be a very important other part of putting the program together. Do you have any questions, comments on that, or any things that you would like to see or hear as we go into the summer and into the fall? One thing I hope to do in the fall, I hope we do in the fall, is that the Pope is inviting all of the homeless to the Vatican in November for the end of the Year of Mercy with the message of open doors. Well, we run a program for the homeless. We've never brought them upstairs. We've never come downstairs. And our parish doesn't yet know people who sleep here 8 times a year. We still don't know them. That's the people on the fringes, on the edges. But they come here. But we haven't connected with them yet. And that's a community that very much looks for us to connect. I even did mention to Bishop Murphy, wouldn't it be nice if we open up the seminary? And let the homeless stay in the seminary, like Pope Francis has suggested, you know? And he said he said he would look into it. I'm serious. I'm not looking for them to be a humorous thing. I think it's a response to the gospel, and I think there are complications with it. I'm not suggesting that we put them in a spot of saying, do this, but we do want to be a church that raises the issues, don't we? And we do want to be a group of people who really are sensitive to the greatest needs. And clearly, these men that come here are the most vulnerable you want to know. The other population that we have that we're seeing very serious problems with is drug addiction, heroin, and overdoses. We're seeing them almost every day here. And Maria Ryan is overwhelmed by the number of people with addictions and overdoses and heroin and all of that medication. It's a very serious issue, and it's part of the Year of Mercy, and it's part of the Joy of Love, to love this population. Another program that Tom mentioned and the Pope really so clearly talks about is parenting, and a program on parenting for young parents. There aren't very many young couples here today, and we think that addressing the issue of parenting for young people, the Pope is very explicit about raising children and what issues they're faced with. He lives in a family, and he knows family. And if you read this document, you'll say, he's talking about your family and my family. And so we want to do something on parenting as well. Divorced and separated, we're doing a program now that we've started for people that are divorced. And we're hoping to expand that and build on it. So that's another issue. All of those are going on with so many of the issues that we see every day, we want to respond to. We want to thank you for this evening, for this day, and we want you to keep informed. Go on the website, look at the bulletin, write in your comments, send in your suggestions. You want to join the group that's up here, it's always welcoming, and we want to include as many people as we can. And we want to conclude by saying thank you for coming today. And, it's not raining anymore, so you can go home.
We have a sheet, Nancy has a sheet. If you could leave your name and your email address, we'll let you know what's going on.
Where is Nancy, so you can be, Nancy over here, so back there.
Okay? So make sure if you want to be a part of this, which we'd love to see,